Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. We got a lot to talk about today, some of which being the Academy dilemma. I don't want to go too far into it. We'll speak a little bit more on that later. And Meteos gets benched this week for the second time in his career, I believe. Anything you want to get into, JNT, before we dive into our first topic for this week?
I think it was three times, just to
Ah,
be
okay.
accurate, because he benched himself on C9 back in the day.
Yes, he did. Good little reminder there. All right, so our
Oh,
first topic for today is about the broadcast over this weekend. We've been talking a lot about the LCS broadcast since the very start of this split. Some ups, some downs. What are your thoughts about this past week's broadcast?
yeah, it's kind of, the broadcast has been a hot topic for many of the weeks of, the start of this LCS split, but it was just a little bit, I had a few points just to make here, because it seemed like the broadcast actually got a little bit worse in terms of the technical difficulties that we're encountering. But, as we all know, it is a remote broadcast, so there are bound to be some problems. But it definitely was a little bit weird to see that the broadcast quality seemed to go down actually from week 2 to week 3. There seems to be almost always some random cut during the draft phase where the screen will go black and then it'll get thrown back to the casters. And we when we were watching the broadcast, we both kind of noticed like the casters always seem like a little bit surprised and confused that it's just getting thrown back to them. But and then we had that whole Prolly freezing. I think that happened twice on the analyst desk and created a bit of a awkward like stall for a little bit. But I don't know. It's a remote broadcast. There's bound to be some issues, but it still seems that problems are continuing to arise on a weekly basis.
And I'm very much in the same boat as you there, where it's like it is frustrating to see, but I think the reality's become we're gonna have to expect this week in, week out until they get back in the LCS studio, which who knows when that's gonna be. It's not gonna be this split, or it's definitely not looking like it will. And so unfortunately we're kind of stuck with this reality of we're gonna be dealing with this until 2021 maybe.
Yeah, at this point, based on the state of the world and COVID specifically in the United States, it definitely looks that way.
Yeah, and like you were saying, I also totally agree that despite it being not the most optimal environment for them to be doing the broadcast in, you would still like to see some improvements week from week to week. And like you said, it did definitely get worse this week from the week before. But I don't think we need to dwell on it too much. Anything else on our opening topic before we move on to our main topic, or rather, not our main topic, but our little recap for this week?
No, I think that's good.
All right, let's jump right into it. Lots of interesting games this weekend. Some interesting in good ways, some interesting in bad ways. I'll let you start us off on what your takeaways were from week 3 matches.
Yeah, there were a lot of good games this week and, kind of exciting matchups that, you know, kind of painted a little bit of a better picture in terms of the overall standing of all the teams. On Friday Night League, we had CLG versus FlyQuest and TL versus C9. Sort of in the TL versus C9 game, it was definitely C9's slowest game in terms of their early game dominance. They didn't, go off to a commanding start like we seem to be accustomed to, but it ended up being a bit of a more slow, methodical game. But C9 was able to close it out, and they definitely, you know, looked to easily be the best team in the league. And even the broadcast was mentioning it. Like, is it too early to start talking about 18 and 0? We'll have to see. Obviously all the teams will improve over time, but at this point right now, it doesn't seem like C9 can be touched.
And I think the biggest thing for me specifically about Cloud9 over this past weekend was, yeah, they had a goal deficit at 15. That was the first time that we've seen that. And it didn't feel like they were behind though. That's the thing with this team is like they still ended up getting 3 drags by 18 minutes or whatever it was. Like they were in more than enough control despite the goal deficit that they were still pushing for Ocean, or not necessarily Ocean Soul. I don't remember what Drag Soul it was, but Dragon Soul at around the 20 to 25 minute mark, which is like unbelievable how they continue to do this game in game out.
Yeah, they seem to be, really the only team that just puts so much priority on the first dragon spawn and doing it as fast as possible. We constantly see C9 when 5 minutes, I don't, is it 5 minutes or 6 minutes? I think it's just 5 minutes. But when dragon spawns at 5 minutes, if you were to just take a snapshot of the map, you'll see Niski already has his lane shoved, Glabber's already on the bot side of the map, and bot lane usually always has its wave shoved, and it's kind of hard to contest. Like you have to make this decision if you're the enemy team against C9 is, oh, are we going to sack these mid and bot waves? And normally when they're shoving these waves, they're trying to stack waves in advance, so it's probably about 2 waves in bot lane and maybe 1.5 waves in mid lane. So you kind of have to make this decision if, oh, are we going to just sack these waves and go contest drag, or are we just going to lose the first drag? And
Well,
in
and
more,
the
go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
The biggest thing for me is that everyone in the world knows what's going to happen. It's not like the other teams are unaware that Cloud9's going to the first drag as soon as it spawns. Everyone knows this is going to happen, and they still don't have a defense for it. So that just goes to show just how far ahead C9 is. Everyone knows what they're going to do, and they could still pull it off time and time again with ease, too. It's not even like they don't even make it look difficult.
Yeah, it just seems the recipe that C9 always likes to go for, and they haven't really strayed from it, is just picking a strong mid jungle 2v2 and getting priority in your lanes. And, I don't think it's going to be very difficult to stop C9 if one, you decide to take, more of a backseat approach and pick a scaling comp, and you're kind of just hoping that you can survive the early game. And in most cases, teams aren't. We kind of saw that in the EG game last week where they, EG picked like Kassadin last pick into Lee Sin Karma. Karma, a very lane dominant champion just by nature of the champion, and Lee Sin, one of the most aggressive early game junglers in the game. And it's kind of like nobody, uh, the only game that they've really been contested early game was the Golden Guardians game, where Golden Guardians made a priority to be contesting mid shove. But in every other game, it just seems like teams are sacrificing their mid shove and they're just letting kind of C9 bully them around in the early game.
Yeah, the other one thing that I wanted to touch on C9, or my last point anyways, is that we finally saw the Wukong. And not only was it good, it was easy. Like
Yeah.
they made that comp look so easy with the dive top. You had TF come up top. Like it was like there was no it I've said it. It was easy. There was nothing to it. They didn't even need to use it that often. Like Licorice was already winning lane on his own. And then they used the dive once or twice in the top lane, which was, yeah, it was GG from that point, and we saw C9 put an absolute beating on Immortals.
Yeah, it was funny. There were some tweets from like the Immortals players afterwards saying they got cyberbullied. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I
yeah,
did see those
and
myself.
Licorice definitely had, I think, his best week of LCS so far. They kind of, it was honestly that Immortals game was sort of the first game that C9 kind of put any resources top lane. So it was
Yeah,
good to see Licorice had a good performance. He was playing the OP Wukong, and Licorice said in the post game interview how that matchup Wukong versus Aatrox is, it's a pretty stale matchup unless there's like jungle intervention or resources put towards the lane, and you know C9 kind of just played through that. You saw, like you said, 2 quick TF ults plus Wukong ult top lane, and the game was pretty much over.
yeah. And then anything else on C9 before we move on to another team?
No, they'll we'll have to see if their last true test of their first round robin is TSM, and they lost to TSM in the second round robin last split, so they didn't get the 18-0. So we'll have to see how that match plays out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That should be one of the more hype games that C9 has in the rest of their first half of the split. Speaking of TSM looked, I want to say good. One game not so good the other. What are your thoughts on TSM over the last weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think TSM had a really good game against EG. Definitely one of their better performances this split. But as you said, one good, one bad. They had a bit of a banger game against 100T where, Bjergsen had to result to the typical Bjergsen just randomly ending the game through backdoor to, win the game. You know, that game specifically, 100 Thieves versus TSM, was actually a really good game. I thought Ryoma had one of the best games we've ever seen from him. He was doing a lot on the Azir, but 100T kind of losing control of the game late in terms of their macro, and Bjergsen just walks into the base and hits the Nexus with Orianna, and the game's over.
And that game to me spoke to bad macro from both sides. 100 Thieves and TSM were not looking clean. The biggest thing about that game from TSM's point of view was just Doublelift getting overconfident. And like you said, Ryoma looked good on the Azir and he punished Doublelift's overextension. But that can't happen without Doublelift messing up first. And so you really gotta. I think Doublelift got a little a test there for himself. He's got to be able to hold himself back in games that are clearly won. There's no need to try to style on someone, especially when you're a team that needs every win. TSM has not been the old version of TSM that we've seen for years and years. This is a team that needs their wins now, and there's no reason to be trying to style on anyone like Doublelift was there on the Callista, going a little bit too ham, getting punished, which was the only reason why 100 Thieves had a chance of winning that game in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, I think a lot of overconfidence by Doublelift in, some of these later team fights in the game. I think he started out, I think his KDA, like, maybe 20 something minutes into the game was like 5-1-4. And then I think he ended the game 5-6 or 6-5-6 or something like that. So he had many team fights where he was just instantly the first one to die, not dealing too much damage. And he went for the I guess more you could consider greedy Callista build, in that he went Blade of the Rune King into Ginsu's and then Death Dance fourth item, as opposed to Blade of the Rune King, Runeans, and then Death Dance third item. So, you know, definitely think it wasn't a clean game. Wasn't a clean game from Doublelift, and honestly, it wasn't a clean game from the majority of TSM minus Bjergsen and Biofrost. Bjergsen kind of saving the game with his Oriana play, but Biofrost was, I think, probably the only reason why TSM was in that game,
Yeah,
coming
and
down to the later half. He had a really good, two really good hooks on Ryoma and Cody Sun in the TSM base, and I honestly kind of saved the game for them.
yeah, and not that. So I actually thought Doublelift played well in the early game.
Oh yeah,
There
yeah,
was
I
no
think he
issues
did,
there.
but late game you just, playing too overconfident.
Yeah, and not that we don't want to see that, because let's be honest, that was a great game to watch. Despite the game not being a high quality game, it was one of the better games to watch this split. And the last couple of things that I want to say on TSM from my side are that I enjoyed seeing TSM change things up. And to me, it shouldn't even be a change things up, but it kind of was, going back to Bjergsen on LeBlanc, and they put Broken Blade on Shen. This is like old version of TSM. I liked it because we haven't seen much, if any, Shen at all this split. So I liked their change of game play style. They didn't need to put Bjergsen on fiddlesticks anymore. Not that it was the worst, but it was pretty bad in one game specifically, that Syndra game. But it was nice to see TSM go back to what I would call maybe an old style of putting the game in Bjergsen's hands.
Yeah, it was definitely, as you mentioned, a really interesting draft. This was the first Varus game, the super OP poke lethality Varus. TSM actually on red side decided to let through Varus, so Hunter T picked that up, but kind of some blunders in the early game from Hunter T, deciding to split the map top side, having the Varus sit alone bot lane where he got his flash blown and then got dove. So, first game that we saw Varus wasn't the best showing from Cody Sun because he was put behind so early. But I think we still all recognize that Varus is a super strong champion, and I don't think we'll see too much of him moving forward.
Yep, I agree. Anything before we move on to our Golden Boys?
No, the Golden Guardians, I think we're good. So Golden Guardians, they're definitely like a super super interesting team. We saw them lose to Immortals in their first game, but then end up beating FlyQuest in their second game. And for me, this team sort of gives me that feel where they play to the level of their opponents. I think
For
from
sure.
from Golden Guardians, some of the best games that we've seen from them, being the C9 game and this most recent FlyQuest game, they look so, so, so much better than they do versus the games where you see like them versus Immortals or them versus CLG. It just seems like this team, when they're playing a good team, they play really well, and when they're playing a bad team, they're not playing well. And like I said, they kind of play to the level of their opponents, and it's definitely not what you want in terms of like consistency in the LCS.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about this team anymore, man. Every time, like, there's games where they lose and you're just like, wow, they played like shit. And then there's games that they lose and you're like, that was a good loss, man. You guys look
Yeah.
good losing out there. Like, I don't know what to think about this team. They got a nice surprise win against FlyQuest this weekend. Although for FlyQuest, I didn't think they looked they looked odd to me. I don't want to go too far into FlyQuest, but FlyQuest looked a little bit off. They looked a little lazy, as I said earlier in the week. But with Golden Guardians, they seem to have that style where they want to keep split pushing. They keep having Demonte on the Twisted Fate, which I don't mind. I think Twisted Fate has shown to be very effective in the LCS.
Yeah, they went for kind of similar comp that Team Liquid did in the Team Liquid Dignitas game, where they had Jace top lane and TF mid lane, and they kind of recognized during the game that, hey, we're not going to win this game through team fighting, and we should just full commit to the split push. So you know, they definitely look to be a team that likes to play around the split push and the 1-3-1 style. We saw a 1-3-1 game from them very early on in the split when Golden Guardians played Dignitas. That was Demonte playing Echo. So, this team giving some more different looks to the traditional just 5v5 team fight it out kind of NA style. But like you said, it's really hard to like put this team like it's hard to just rank this team because one week they'll look really good, or one game of the week they'll look really good, and then the next one they'll look really bad, and it's really difficult to rank a team when they're not consistent.
And these guys for me, they are the most difficult team for me to rank. Them along with TSM are the two teams that I have a hard time putting my finger on. But I don't got too much more to say about Golden Guardians. Do you have anything else before we move on to the next team?
Nope.
All right, Dignitas is next up on the list. Dignitas can still not win a game, but I think there's been a couple of good things to say about this team.
Yeah, I think this week we saw Lorlo come in for Viper. Viper has not been playing well at all. His first 4 games of the regular split were not very good, and then even in Academy he was getting a little bit dumpstered. I don't know if he had a Wukong game in Academy where he was like 0-5 by 12 minutes into the game.
You could tell he was tilted. It
Yeah,
didn't look like the Viper that we've seen over the past year or so.
yeah, but Lorlo coming in, I think Lorlo actually had 2 pretty good games in 2 losing efforts, but I think he was actually doing a pretty good job. Honestly, the Achilles heel for Dignitas, this iteration at least, seems to be Acadian. He didn't, I don't know, he seems to be not on the same page with the rest of Dignitas. He's constantly getting caught out, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see Dardoch coming in this week.
And I'm looking to see Dardoch come in this week as well. I don't want to just dogpile on top of Acadian, but like you said, there have been things that you could just tell that he ain't quite right, especially when he was on Olaf and he was in the Baron pit there, and everyone in the world knows that a hook is coming, and of
Yeah,
course he gets hooked out of the pit. Like, oh my gosh, man. And now we have to remember like what we see from the broadcast is not what the players see, right? There's fog of war. But any player in that game should know there's a blitzcrank on the other side. If you're a pro, that's something you should know. There's a blitzcrank on the other side and I don't want to get hooked, and that to me was very bronze of him, if I do say so. And like you also like we mentioned last week, Froggen hasn't been too great either. One player that I do want to talk about though is Afro. I thought Afro had a really good week. He's looking good on that Thresh down there in the bot lane. Not too much to complain about when it comes to Dignitas with Afro and your boy Johnson.
yeah, I think Dignitas' spot lane has actually been playing pretty well. Johnson definitely is the best player on that team, and Aphromoo seems to be stepping up his game a little bit. And they look really good together. And I think if they can sort of if they can get this roster right with Dardoch coming in, and even potentially a different mid laner coming in, because as you said, I don't think Froggen's having the best split either. But I think there are definitely some bright spots for this Dignitas roster, and if they can sort of figure it together and maybe get their mojo, they can potentially make a push for playoffs as 8 teams make playoffs this split, but we'll get into more of that later.
And the last thing that I want to say about this Dignitas team is that this is probably the most hope I've ever had for an 0-6 or an 0 and anything team. You know, for a winless team after 3 weeks, it's definitely not looking good. Let's not pretend that they're looking like a great team. But there's been a lot of times where I see no hope for any team, and I can see some hope for them to scrape out a few wins this split. I could see them getting 3 or 4 wins.
Yeah, I mean, they at least from my standards, they look a little more hopeful than 100 Thieves or potentially Immortals. But again, we'll get into that later.
Yep.
And then
Last
again,
up on our. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna intro it, but the last team that we have on our takeaways
Yep.
for this week is CLG. CLG still sitting towards the top of the standings. There's a big clump of teams tied at 4-2. CLG being one of them. um, you know, they're still picking up some wins despite their, honestly, in both of our opinions, lackluster play. And I think both of us are still hesitant to put CLG up in this, 4-2 category. Sure, they are 4-2, but I don't think they're definitely of the same skill of the other 4-2 teams like FlyQuest, like Team Liquid, like EG, and even TSM.
And I try not to tunnel vision too hard on this team being a bad team. It's something that I really want to be careful about doing because yes, I do think that they're a bad team still. They are 4-2. That means they're not the worst team. That's what that means to me. They are about to be tested big time with their schedule coming up. We got Cloud9 into TSM, into Team Liquid, into EG. Pretty much the best four teams in the league. Maybe you could throw FlyQuest in there, of course. So four of the best five for sure teams in the league that CLG is going to have to play against. And I guess I will be able to say that maybe this team is a good team, or at least a decent team, if they manage to take any wins out of these next four games.
Yeah, I think we're all under the assumption that they're going to take a loss to C9. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we'll get a better picture of what CLG looks like. I think after these Team Liquid and EG matches for sure.
And I look at the thing is though for me is when I look at these four teams that they're about to play against, like I said, they got C9, TSM, TLEG. I can't picture which one they're going to beat. Like in my mind, it's clear that all of those teams, if I were to take them against CLG, spoiler alert for the end of the show, I'm taking the other team. So, um, should be interesting though. I do know that after those four games, they got a little bit of an easier schedule, but it's hard to look 3 weeks in advance when you got four of the top five teams in the league that you have to face. Especially after TSM looked pretty good in one of their games this weekend, could have looked good in both. So, um, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about CLG. I'll refrain from getting too far ahead of myself though for now.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of our, those are sort of our main takeaways from week 3. But, you know, also we wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive into, the two of the more talked about teams this week, 100 Thieves and Immortals. First, we're going to start off with 100T, but I think the big news coming out last night was that contracts and Poom. Let's hope we have this name right. This guy's sort of an unknown name, but two substitutions coming in for the 100T side. Meteos out, contracts in, Poom in, Stunt out. So, what do you think about these two new players coming in for 100T?
I love it and I hate it, and there's a few reasons for each. I love it because I think 100 Thieves has looked like definitely one of the worst teams in the league this split. It's very to me, it's very obvious that they are 8, 9, or 10 at the end of the split. Um, I think Meteos has probably looked as bad as I've ever seen him. Um, and I love Meteos, and that's why I hate it. But I love it because I do think it's time for a little bit of a change. It's been a while since we've seen contracts play in the LCS, so I'm interested to see like what kind of contracts we see. It's been a while, and as far as Poom goes, I think this one is really interesting. First of all, Stunt has been, in my opinion, I think Stunt has been the worst player in the LCS so far this split.
I
Um,
Ica.
yeah, I would still say Stunt.
Okay.
Yeah, and um, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, and what's interesting mostly about this is that Poom tweeted out himself in reply like I was like an amateur a month and a half ago. So he goes from amateur to academy to starting in the LCS all within the span of a month and a half, as he puts it. So to me, that's really interesting, and I mean, if there's a time to be nervous, it's now, right? However, I hope that he doesn't feel too nervous. I hope that people do give him benefit of the doubt and take it easy on what is a new NA talent. I'm really interested to see what we get out of him alongside Cody Sun.
Yeah, I think one of the really good things that I like to see is definitely fresh faces coming into the LCS. Contracts. He's still a relatively young player. I know he's been in academy for the last, I think, year. I think he was on Golden Guardians after his time on C9 and then academy thereafter. I think in season 9 and the start of season 10. But in terms of LCS games and LCS play, he's definitely still more of a newer player, a bit of a more known quantity than Poom. But I think it's good to see two fresh faces. And Poom, I believe he's on the 100T trainee team, which I think is called 100X. I'm not exactly sure about that, but I think it's called 100X. And I know they play in various like semi-pro tournaments and whatnot. But good to see a fresh face, and I'd much rather him than Stunt be in. So
Yeah, I agree. I think it's to the point where you got to try to make something happen. Things aren't going your way. Try to shake things up. So I'm totally cool with that substitution. Moving on to Meteos and his benching, what do you think about how he took to Twitter, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I'm gonna pull up some of these tweets here. One of them was a screenshot of his first tweet, but the rest were Reddit comment, or the rest I found in the Reddit post about his benching because the tweets have since been deleted. All four of these tweets actually. But just to read them out for you guys here, first tweet was, "This is going to sound like a troll post, but I just got word that I'm being benched after week 3 summer split again, XD. Not sure why I expected anything different." And then to follow up with that other tweet, says, "Pretty weird to hear the players on my team didn't know about or agree with the decision. All credit goes to at Zix, at Jungle Juice, and at Papa Smithy. Clearly, the people not on the team know what's best for it." So just to lead off with those first two tweets, because those tweets first came in before the next two. But oh my god, like obviously Meteos is upset about his benching, but it's kind of the word about all of this was just how just unprofessional and kind of childish this was to at your own coaching staff after being benched. What do you think about that?
So I have two ways of looking at this. One, this is the way he did it last time as well, and like it's hard for me because I'm a huge Meteos fan. It's hard for me to see him take such a an immature approach to all this. But the other way I look at it is this is not the first time 100 Thieves has had issues with notifying their players about what's going on, or even just being straight with the public. This is like this is exactly what happened the last time they benched. I think it was Cody Sun and maybe it was Meteos alongside him a couple of years ago. So to me, it's a little disappointing to see that the organization hasn't learned from this to be able to sit down with the players and say, look, this is what we're gonna do. Like I don't like to. I don't want to defend the way Meteos is going about this. I don't think he should ever go to Twitter, but I do understand his frustration.
Yeah, I mean, I can completely understand that he's frustrated and he's venting on Twitter, but I think it's just really inappropriate and immature to be, you know, adding your own coaching staff in these very passive aggressive tweets. As you mentioned, 100T, they did have some previous issues with clarity in terms of their fans and their players about the benching. But I think for this one, in terms of like just in comparison to the last one, I think it's fairly obvious the reasoning for Meteos' benching, and at least in terms of public perception, a lot of people understand it. So while I can get behind him in the fact that obviously he's going to be frustrated and he's venting a little bit, I do think that you know 100T is obviously if it's actually true that none of the other players on the starting roster were involved in this conversation, obviously that's very bad, and it's kind of surprising honestly from people like Zix and Papa Smithy, who I think are two really well respected figures in the league community. It's a bit surprising that they didn't consult the rest of their team, but I don't think Meteos can actually really question the reasoning behind his benching, even though he obviously feels like he's a very integral part of this team, and it's difficult to play with the team performing so poorly.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the benching is absolutely warranted. He has looked the worst I have ever seen him. So that I have no issue with. Again, I do think that 100 Thieves as an organization could have gone about it a different way, but there's no need to take to Twitter for this. And what's interesting to me is I think that this could be a sign that this is the last time we see Meteos in a 100 Thieves jersey in the LCS. Now, I'm not saying that's what will happen, but it's very possible because he already had his first chance with the org a couple years ago and things didn't go too well, and the way he handled getting benched wasn't too good. And now he goes and does it a second time on Twitter again, calling out the coach and calling out the all the staff. That's not the way you go about it. And so to me, I don't think you get any more chances with this with the same org. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't see Meteos starting in the LCS for 100 Thieves ever again.
Yeah, just to now look at the other two tweets that he sent out a little bit later of last night after these first two and had been deleted, but I can see why people are calling me unprofessional for my tweets. Not really sure how else to express my anger about the situation. Sucks to be scapegoated after the amount of effort I put into the team. I never cared much about my stats and I've always put my teammates in good situations. Of course, my stats will not look good if we aren't winning.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
go ahead.
go ahead. Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Um. So for me, it's it feels to me like he feels like this is a unique situation to him. Like he is not the first player to be benched and to also feel like they're still deserving of their spot. Like that's just natural to have confidence in yourself and to feel like, you're putting in all this effort into your team. I'm sure everyone else that gets benched is also putting effort into their team. So uh, to me, this seems very much of a he's playing the victim here. It's not he's not a victim here. That it's business. This is how the LCS works. You want to play in the LCS, you got to start winning some games, and they're not winning games. He's not looking good. He's definitely looking like a big part of the reason they're losing, and so for those reasons, I'm more so on the side of the organization than I am the player here.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely on the side of the organization here. I think Meteos, like exactly like you said, he's kind of playing the victim here, and it's pretty rare actually to see these kinds of players taking to Twitter and calling out their organization or calling out people within the organization about the decisions that they're making. I mean, you can even just look back to as recent as Immortals starting their entire academy lineup at the start of the split. We didn't really hear any word from, or not starting their entire academy roster. I mean, sorry, at the start of the split when they subbed in Potluck, Alltech, and Gate to pair along with Soaz and Ica. But we didn't really hear any word from Xmithy, Apollo, or Hakuho. But they've kind of stayed quiet, put their heads down, and continued to work hard. And part of it all is due to Immortals' failures, but they're back in now. And there was an Xmithy interview on Travis Gafford's channel that both of us just watched before the start of this episode. But he was when he found out that he was getting benched, he was of the mindset that he needs to put his head down and work harder to get a spot back. And in this case, Meteos, seems to be playing victim and crying on Twitter. It seems so. I'm definitely on the org side here, and I do agree with you. I think this could be the last time we see Meteos in an 100T jersey.
Yeah. And that leads perfect right into our next topic, which is Immortals this past week firing their GM and their head coach. Any thoughts on any of the latest things coming out of the Immortals squad?
Yeah, I mean, it was early. I think it was right after week two. It was announced that Immortals was letting go of Zabutin, their head coach, and Keaton, their general manager. And then the word came in, I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday, so about 2 to 3 days later, that they were going to be starting their entire academy roster in place of the LCS roster. And
Yeah, so just to clarify, in that Xmithy interview, he did say it was on Wednesday night. I believe he said that the academy team was given the option to play because he talked about it as if like they weren't sure if they were going to play academy and LCS this week, but ultimately they decided to say that they would play both. Is what it sounded like in the interview.
yeah, so they got the word, later in the week in terms of they were going to get the call up to play their LCS games, and they ended up playing. Excuse me, they played their academy games and their LCS games, and it was, I guess you have to say it was Immortals' best week because they won a game, but as we said before, they got dominated by C9, and we saw sort of a lackluster Golden Guardians in which Immortals was able to take the win, and they're currently sitting at 1-5 in the standings right now, not in last place, thanks to Dignitas. But I mean, a win's a win. It'll be interesting to see how their roster plays out in terms of what combination of players they're going to continue to move with. I think it was pretty clear that um, the former starting bot lane in Alltech and Gate were not performing well, including Ica wasn't playing too well. And to be honest, I think Potluck was actually their best performing player on Immortals, or one of their best performing players. And obviously, it's a difficult situation when you have Xmithy behind you because he's one of the most tenured players in LCS, and had just got off of winning 4 championships with Team Liquid. So we'll have to see what what the roster looks like next week and moving forward.
And the interesting thing to me was that they put to bed the rumors about Xmithy showing up to practice intoxicated. Apparently, that is not true, and that those were nothing but rumors. And so you really got to wonder what the decision making was to sit all of these players that are LCS caliber, especially Xmithy. I could understand going with Alltech and Gate. While I don't agree with it, I could understand it. The fact that they sat them for 1 week, they sat them for 2 weeks, it made no sense to me, and I'm really happy for this Immortals squad and for Immortals fans because getting that one win already shows improvement. And the fact that you have three players that have had a decent history in the past with like Apollo Hakuo have been always okay. They've never been anything amazing in the LCS, but we know that Xmithie has been probably the best jungler NA has ever seen. It gives hope to Immortals fans and to the Immortals players that they don't have to finish 9th or 10th and they can make playoffs this split. Um, Another thing that I want to talk about is with the firing of the coach and the GM, the people taking place is something that's a little bit interesting to me. Xmithie spoke on how it was some of the academy coaching staff that would be taking over for their squad, and there was also talk that the oh boy, the Overwatch team, the LA, I don't know what their team is, the
Oh
Los
yeah.
Angeles team, their GM will be taking over the GM position for Immortals. So that was something that was a little bit interesting to me, not necessarily in a good way. I don't know if there's ever a way to make this situation good because you don't really have any backup GMs just hanging around for LCS. But it's interesting the moves that they made. I think it gives a little bit of hope for this team.
Yeah, definitely is difficult to, find out of house replacements for head coach and GM, midway through this split. As you mentioned, they have some people not necessarily within the direct Immortals League of Legends organization coming in to also give some assistance to some of the, the strategic coach and, the assistant coaches. But we'll have to see how they perform and what their roster looks like. I think there's a little bit of hope for this roster now with Xmithie coming back in. I mean, eh, just like you said, it was kind of baffling, honestly, when Xmithie wasn't a part of the starting roster. He's been one of the better LCS, but one of the best or better LCS players you could say of all time, and it was just really confusing to hear about his benching in the first place. But anything else you got about Immortals?
Yeah, a couple of things. I do want to talk
Oh
about
yeah,
how all there was a bunch of flame for Aka as soon as the coaching staff were let go. Um, a little bit unfortunate that we had to see it come from other LCS players as well, with Solo tweeting out, that Aka should be worried about his job and whatnot. While I understand that you want to be active on social media as a player, you want to grow your own personal brand and stuff like that. There's ways of doing that without tearing others down. And it did actually cross the line to me of what we consider cyberbullying, right? And I was really, really happy to see Broxa stand up for Aka. I think that the more we hear about Broxa, the more you hear that he's just an absolute professional. And I really gain a lot of respect for Broxa since he's been part of the LCS. Just a totally nice guy, and it's good to see that he's standing up for his fellow players, even if they're not on his team.
yeah. There's been this, I guess, storyline built in that Ica only got his job in his starting position in the LCS due to him being French and his relationship with Zabutin also being French. But I do remember this was in an involvement with Ica being on Twitter, but he originally said that um, he only had one interview with
Hmm.
Immortals, and then he was pretty much offered the starting role, which I thought was actually a little bit interesting and even a little bit concerning, honestly, that an organization is willing to pick up a player for their starting position after only one interview and one conversation. So hearing that was a little bit surprising to me, and we're going to talk a little bit, just in a little bit about the LCS talent versus academy talent. But I just thought it
Yeah,
was super interesting that a guy was able to get a starting spot in the LCS after only having one conversation with the team.
and it brings into question what are these other teams doing when they're scouting for players, and how
Yeah,
how are other teams bringing in different talent from around the world, or even just within NA. I wonder what the scouting process is like. It certainly brings that to light. The last thing that I wanted to talk about on Immortals is what is their next move, if any? Do they have any other moves? The one thing that comes to mind for me is we're looking at Insanity, who's looked okay considering he hasn't had too much time in the LCS. However, very much unproven, and so you have to wonder what if things don't work out for Insanity, and then what? Do you go back to Aka? I don't think you do. But if it's your only option, you have to. And then it brings into question, well, there's golden glue that's available. And we've seen lots of golden glue over the years. You know what you're getting with him. You're not getting anything amazing, but maybe it's worth that consideration of picking up a guy like golden glue to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, I mean, definitely interesting to see, how these bottom teams sort of manage to, you know, make some changes and see how those changes affect the rest of the standings moving forward.
Yep, yep, yep. Should be interesting for both of those teams that we just talked about. 100 Thieves making some moves, Immortals making some moves. Really interesting. Really looking forward to see how these two teams pan out over the next few weeks, or just the rest of the split. Really. Diving into our second last, I should say, topic of the week. We're going to talk about the potential Kespa Cup idea over in NA and talk a little bit about how Treats and LS um, talked a little bit about the academy scene in North America, and that is our academy dilemma. Nolan, I'll let you start us off with this one.
Yeah, I mean, there was after this week of LCS specifically, there's a lot of talk after the Immortals versus Golden Guardians game where we saw Immortals take their first win fielding their entire academy roster. There was a lot of talk in the scene about, the utilization of the academy scene and academy players and a lot of these veteran LCS players basically just continuing to hold on to their spots despite poor play. And we saw there was LS and Treats. LS, a very famous league personality, and Treats, an academy player. I believe he's still on TSM. I don't think he's on a different team, but I think he's still on TSM. He's their
I think he's
support.
still on TSM. Yeah.
Yeah, their support player. But LS had this idea of creating a Kespa Cup tournament style in NA. And for those who don't know what Kespa Cup is a tournament that's held over in Korea, which is a tournament that includes all 10 LCK teams. It includes I believe it's the top six challenger teams from Korea, and then the winners from the challenger qualifying series, as well as the top two teams from two amateur leagues. I believe that's how it works. So in total, 20 teams, 10 of those being the top LCK teams, the ones in the LCK, obviously, all of the uh, LCK challenger teams, and then four qualifying teams. Some of those coming from the the challenger scene qualifier, and then two of them coming from amateur tournaments. So, kind of an idea in North America to kind of promote and give the academy scene some more competition. Like, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea is a good idea just for the fact that it creates more competition and can give some of these academy players some real test against these LCS level teams. But I think it's a super interesting idea. I think looking forward though, maybe that's not an idea that would come to fruition anytime soon, but definitely could be something, to look forward to maybe making or look forward to doing in the future.
And to me, like you said, it's maybe it doesn't happen soon, but it does need to start with people that have a solid voice in the league community to start talking about these kinds of things, like LS. Like that guy is very influential. He knows his stuff, and so when a guy like LS comes forward and brings an idea like this, people are going to talk about it. And I personally hope to see it happen. I'm sure you do as well. You and I, we just want more content, right? The more content
Yeah.
there is, the better. I would absolutely love to see it. The few hesitations that I have, though, one of them being, what's the incentive for pro players to want to play in this, right? Like, let's say you don't have any money to play for, and now you're just playing for pride. Well, as far as people are concerned right now, you're already better than all those academy teams. So where's the incentive for you to play? You only have something to lose. You don't have anything to win there. So to me, there's that issue, and maybe they have some monetary compensation that happens for the Kespa Cup. I'm not too sure. Maybe you have a little bit of insight on that. However, that's one of my reservations. The other is Korea is very much a different region than NA. And we know that the talent pool in Korea is better and probably much more worthy of having a Kespa Cup kind of tournament. I'm not convinced that the competition would be very close here in NA. I think it's already pretty obvious. Um, well, maybe not this split, but it was already very obvious last split who was going to win finals. I think it would be the same thing of who's going to win the NA version of Kespa Cup.
One thing that I do think is a little bit underrated in terms of Kespa Cup, and I think a lot of the reasons why these LCK teams, I think, are very involved within this tournament, and I think a lot of them like this tournament, is that it's held right before the start of spring split. So usually this tournament takes place towards the end of 2019, after Worlds and after they've moved on from the Worlds patch and they're usually caught up in sort of the preseason patch or maybe the first patch of the preseason patch or right before they get into the start of the regular season. But I think a lot of
Hmm.
these LCK teams use it as good practice for the start of the season. I think there's a lot of teams that, and specifically in NA, that they might not take their first few weeks, or they might not take their first few weeks as serious, or maybe start up their scrims a lot later
Totally
than other
agree.
teams. But I think it's really good for teams and even these academy teams to just get some practice early on in the season and in a new patch in stage games, because I think there's a big discrepancy between solo queue and scrims as opposed to stage games. So I think from adding this kind of a tournament, I think it can only be beneficial. Maybe, some teams might not see it as beneficial. The top teams, like maybe C9, doesn't think it's, worth their time because they feel like they might stomp everybody. But who knows? We never really know what the landscape of the scene is going to be towards the end of the year. Maybe teams have really caught up to C9, or teams are starting to perform a lot better. And, there's nothing wrong with getting extra practice in before the start of a season.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think teams are very slow to start in LCS, and so I think this is actually a perfect yeah, I'll say fix. I think it's a fix for that kind of mentality and that slow getting into things. So that's something that I am really interested in. However, like you mentioned, who knows when or if this will happen. However, let's talk a little bit about the little graphic that you pulled up right there. Explain to our listeners, people who aren't necessarily watching, explain to them what you got pulled up and what it all means.
Yeah, so just the list that I pulled up, it was the top comment on this Reddit post that I'm referring to with LS and Treats talking about this Kespa Cup style tournament. But basically, this graphic just sort of shows the the longest tenured academy players and what their how many games they've played, what their win record and KDA looks like. But it's just this list is primarily just of all the, I guess you could say, the top academy players and how they're looking. I think some of the ones to take a note of, as it kind of as it says, holy shit on the side, is a Shoryu on TL, playing 73 regular season academy games with a almost 62% win rate and a 5.23 KDA, as well as Diamond, the support for C9's academy team, with 54 regular season games in academy with an 80% win ratio and a 5.0 KDA. But kind of Treats is just trying to shed some light here on these top academy players, and believes that these top academy players should deserve some of these starting spots over these declining LCS pros. And in his tweets, he specifically said Immortals Academy is currently 3-3 in Academy and just took their first win in LCS. Hopefully, this opens some eyes about Academy versus LCS quality right now. Only the top LCS teams are better than Academy teams, despite what the public thinks. Wish there was a tournament to showcase. And then another tweet after that, because LCS players that don't deserve to play, they are scared to lose their spot and wouldn't want this type of tournament. And yeah, so just kind of shedding some light on these top academy players and think that this Kespa Cup style tournament would be good for them to showcase their skills against these LCS teams.
And so for me, the way I look at this is I do agree with Treats in the sense that there are some players in academy, or maybe even just some teams that are worthy of playing in the LCS. That is it's easy to say before actually seeing it. Um, and while those KDAs and win rates look good, those are still academy win rates and KDAs, right? The ones that do stand out, the ones that are with holy shit next to them, those do mean something. However, I don't think that using Immortals Academy is a good example because these are all players, maybe not all players, mostly players that have played in the LCS for a long time, right? With Xmithy, that is not an academy player. Apollo Hawkwood, those are not academy players in my eyes. So while I do agree with him, I don't think the team he chose to use as an example of an academy team beating an LCS team. I don't. That to me was an LCS team against another LCS team.
Yeah, and even just as you mentioned that, Immortals, this roster that they most recently fielded has what we both think are three LCS level players. In the same sense, you can also turn to a team like Dignitas, who have been, they're signing and even fielding these academy players in LCS. So I do think it's a bit of a it's we're only kind of looking at, I mean, Treats is only talking about one end of the spectrum here, and it's he's talking about the worst performing LCS team, which was Immortals at the time, and other teams are talking about Dignitas, who again are one of the worst performing NA teams. But while I completely understand his take, and I do recognize that there are some very great academy talents in academy that should probably garner some LCS spots, I do think it's a little quick to just jump into saying that all these academy teams are of equal skill or are just under the skill of these bottom tier LCS teams or even mid tier LCS teams, they say.
Yeah, I've been watching, and I don't know if you have as well. I've been watching some of these academy games, man, and they look to me to be very much not on the same level of LCS play. And I think that's really saying something, especially this split. Um, well, maybe not this split, but this year. Whereas the LCS to me has looked the worst it's ever looked, honestly, or maybe in a long time. Let's say that. So the fact that there's a clear distinction in my eyes of what an LCS team looks like and what an academy team looks like this year, while LCS is, quote myself, the worst it's looked, I think that speaks a little bit to maybe a disparity in skill level.
Yeah, I think one thing that is super interesting when you take a look at this graphic is specifically C9 Diamond. He's been on C9's academy team, I think, since season 8. Maybe it's been since season 9, but I'm pretty sure it's been since season 8. And honestly,
I'm
I
not
think
sure.
I think he's in my opinion, he's an LCS level support. I know he got offers to sign with Optic at the time, back in I think it was in between spring and summer for season 9. I remember there were rumors of he was getting offers to go to Optic, and I think Optic was trying to buy out his contract from C9. But one thing that I think is super interesting, and C9 is always at the forefront of this conversation in terms of academy and academy talent, because we've seen they're willing to part ways with these more expensive players and bring up these lesser known players. Like after when season 7 ended, they let go of Impact, and TL got on this the rumored $1 million contract and put Licorice in, and he's pretty much turned into the best top laner in the league. You can argue that in some cases, last split there was argument that Someday was better than him, but I think he's the consensus best top laner in the league. And players like
Agreed.
Blabber, Sven Skaren voicing his displeasure with C9, and C9 rather stick with C9 would rather put in Blabber and trade Sven Skaren away to EG. And one thing that I think C9 they're really savvy about is holding on to these academy players and getting the most like bang for their buck in terms of knowing when to make these various roster moves. And honestly, I think C9 is probably just waiting for some team to come with them to this with a king's ransom to try to buy out Diamond. I think that's what their plan is, and that's what they're doing.
It's very possible. We've known that C9 is almost always on the winning side of deals. Um, for the I don't know for the past I don't even know how long, a long time. Um, with this talk about academy, I think it's worth bringing up the last point here. Whereas CLG Weldon
Oh yeah, let
wants
me
to
pull
move
up the tweet.
yeah,
Oh
CLG
man.
Weldon wants to he wants to make a little shakeup in North America, and he wants to separate North America into NA West and NA East. I'll let you read the tweet, Nolan, and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think this tweet came out right after the Sunday games last night, but it says, we really need an NA East and an NA West. Let's set up the conference system already. Just move Academy to New York City and rename it NA East. Let's have East versus West throughout the year. It's crazy that New York City isn't an esports hub. Disregarding the last point because it's not really valid to our conversation, but this is, oh man, this is part of the reason why I find it difficult to think that CLG is in good hands and is as good as they think they seem to say that they are, because it's just really crazy to me that Weldon thinks that we have enough talent to make a sustainable and like a quality league if we were to just insert 10 more leagues in 10 more teams into the league. It's just crazy to me. As we both talk about off stream and in our own time, but the LCS currently is finding it difficult to field 10 LCS quality rosters. We have 3 teams in Dignitas, Immortals, and 100T that look really, really bad. And, we're trying to find some points of hope for them in terms of these new players coming in. But they look like academy level teams. And I don't think it would be beneficial to the league to add in of 10 more teams of lesser quality that would just make, some of these games to watch even worse.
I completely agree, and it also makes you wonder. There's 10 organizations that sign up for franchising under 10 teams. They did not agree to play with 20 teams in North America. They agreed to pay their fee to be part of a 10 team system. To me, like this seems like you're trying to put esports over in New York just for the sake of wanting esports
Yeah.
to be just for wanting New York City to be an esports hub. That is not how you go about things. I want Toronto to be an esports hub, but guess what? It doesn't make sense to throw 10 teams over there. And like you said, we can't field 10 good teams in NA to begin with. Why are we going to have 20 teams? This blows my mind that this is someone who's coaching an LCS team. I think Weldon has completely lost it here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one point that people were also making on Twitter and on Reddit about this post specifically is that the LCS only just recently announced that they are now profitable, as well as there are many other organizations that have said that their LCS teams and their involvement in LCS is also not even profitable for them. So I think it's kind of crazy to think that we would just be able to create these 10 additional spots with all this infrastructure in New York and not expect another huge like uh, dip in terms of profitability and sustainability for the LCS. I think it doesn't make any sense. Maybe this is something that I could only even like think about getting put in place would be like 10 years down the line. Like
Yeah.
this idea, while I think it could be a good idea if we had the money and the quality of games and the player base, I think it would be a great idea, but I don't think it's feasible. I don't think it's realistic, and for anything, it wouldn't happen for another 10 years, in my opinion.
Well, and to me, it's like, okay, the sentence, let's set up the conference system already. Like he's been waiting for it or something. And to me, there's so many ifs that need to be put in place. If this, if that, if this, if that, then we can do it. And so that's where I'm with you. It's like, if this is going to happen, it's not happening anytime soon because it makes no sense. Mind games, Weldon. Stop it with your mind games, bro. I'm lost over here.
Yeah, Weldon's lost it a little bit. He's off his goop. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Anything else on the Academy before we finish off the week with our picks for this coming up week?
Um, oh, I saw something pretty funny actually. Dom was, I will dominate. I was watching one of his co-streaming highlights, and he was basically this was right after he was discussing the Meteos benching and contracts coming in, and he basically just threw a clip on his stream of some of the plays that contracts has been making in Academy, and they're not that good. So I
Okay.
don't think the quality of Academy is that good. I know at the top end maybe it's decent, but the overall quality of Academy is not that great. As you said yourself, you're watching some games. We saw Viper running it down 05 in 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's just
Here,
move
here's
on. Okay, say something if you
here's my
got it.
issue. Yeah, here's my issue with Dom showing that. I've seen lots of his content over the years, and the issue that I have with Dom saying something is that so maybe there has been nothing but bad plays when it comes to contracts. But I know that if there's been some good plays and some bad plays, Dom's gonna just show you the bad plays. So while I do think that there's maybe he's being totally genuine in what he's seen from Academy and from, I he's the kind of guy to me that's gonna only show you one side of the story. So I don't want to put too much thought into what Dom has to say. However, I can't sit here and act like I can ignore that there's a bunch of bad plays made from contracts. It's definitely something that's going to be in my mind going into the next week of play.
Yeah, and next week of play, good little segue there. We're gonna get into our picks for the week 4 games. So starting out Friday, first game of the day, 100T versus Golden Guardians, another Friday Night League banger hype matchup. This is why we made Friday Night League to watch Golden Guardians versus 100 Thieves. Honestly, it's going to be an interesting game. Golden Guardians, as we're kind of talking about before, they kind of play to the level of their opponent, and 100 Thieves is going to be the first game with their new roster of contracts and Poom, but I'm still going to go with Golden Guardians.
You know what? I'm looking at this game and I see scenarios where 100 Thieves comes out on top. You know, it's like there's a fresh start, sort of. You get that feeling when you got new players coming in. Golden Guardians, we don't know what to expect out of this team anymore. So I'm back and forth on it. I got to go with Golden Guardians though, just because
No balls.
I I can't go with 100 Thieves on this one. Whereas I don't see the replacements for the players they're putting in to be anything amazing. While I am still happy with the changes, I'm not optimistic about them because I don't. Yeah, there's just I'm not seeing too much with contracts and Poom. Golden Guardians for me.
Next game, C9.
C9
Okay, go
next.
next. TSM versus Golden Guardians. Another more interesting matchup. Like we said, we both don't exactly know where to peg these teams in terms of their overall skill level. Definitely an interesting game. I think there's kind of a big jungle gap, honestly, in this game with Closer and Spica. I know Spica has actually he's been playing pretty well, but I think a lot of it is due to the fact of Bjergsen and kind of really helping him out in terms of the mid 2v2, and Closer, pretty much the best player on Golden Guardians right now. And I'm hoping to see some good picks out of Closer, and I do think this is actually going to be a very interesting matchup. But I am going to stick with TSM. Just overall, I think their roster in comparison to the Golden Guardians roster. I think bot and top specifically. I think Haunter's had a fairly lackluster this split. I think he's actually he's not really talked about in terms of having a bad split, but I don't think he's been having a great split at all.
I
And
agree.
I think Doublelift and Biofrost over FBI and who he is pretty obvious to me. Even though I think FBI is actually pretty decent, I think Biofrost is a lot better than who he.
Yeah, this one's a little bit interesting to me because again, we don't know these are the two teams that we have such a hard time pegging. I am gonna go with the upset in this one and go with Golden Guardians, just because this TSM team, man, it's so reminiscent of last split where they would show you something so good one week and come back the next week with nothing. I do want to go with an upset sometime this week, so this is gonna be my upset. I'm gonna go with Golden Guardians over TSM.
All right, next game we have Dignitas versus 100T. I think, you could argue the two worst teams in the league. I think that's a fairly valid argument. Kind of interesting. I think both of us are expecting a roster change from Dignitas in terms of Darduck coming into jungle versus Acadian. And for that reason, I'm going to go with Dignitas on this one.
I'm gonna go with Dig too. These are all, like we said, two teams that are definitely struggling right now. Although we have seen some reason to be optimistic out of Dig. So for me, it doesn't feel like an upset taking Dignitas in this one. It feels like we have two lower tier teams, and I think any team can come out on top. But I'm gonna go with Dig as well.
Next match, pretty kind of a really good match, honestly, in terms of the top of the table, in terms of the standings. But we have EG versus FlyQuest. I think these two teams are actually pretty similar in the way that they actually play through the game. Both Jizuke and Power of Evil are these kinds of players where they're kind of just sitting and farming, scaling up, and then they kind of just take over a bit in the late game. I know Jizuke has been a little bit on the Twisted Fate, but more often than not, we see Jizuke on these kinds of picks like the Corkis or the Azirs, or even sometimes the wacky picks that he has like his pocket pick Echo. But I'm actually gonna go EG on this one. What about you?
I'm gonna go with my heart on this one. I'm gonna go with FlyQuest. I actually can see FlyQuest being a slight underdog in this one. However, um, last week FlyQuest didn't look that great to me, but to me. I mentioned this before. It didn't feel like they were playing bad for just the sake of playing bad. It felt like they were playing lazy, and so to me, it felt like these were easier fixes. I remember in I think it was the Golden Guardians game. They took a lazy path and went through river and got cut off to level 1, and that kind of snowballed the whole game. The rest of the game didn't look like FlyQuest played too bad to me. So I think that this team just had a weak showing. I still think this team's a good team, and so I'm going to go with FlyQuest.
Okay, last game of Saturday, we got Team Liquid versus Immortals. I think this one is, we have Smithy going up against his former team in Team Liquid, but I think this one's fairly obvious, and I'm going Team Liquid.
I'm going to go TL as well, although I would love to see Xmithy get his revenge against his old
Yeah.
squad. Especially, wouldn't it be a nice story to see them come back from Academy and take down TL? TL has not looked too good the last week, I would say. Specifically, God, I'm always bad mouthing Impact, but God, he looked bad this past week. It's amazing to me in both games he managed to have significant leads where he'd be 2-0 and 1 coming out of lane, and then he would continue to get caught time and time again. Now, I don't want to pin that completely on Impact, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but he's getting caught out with leads often, and so it's either him or his team not being on the same page with him. All I know is that they haven't looked completely clean, and so I'm not sold that this is a very obvious game. I'm gonna go TL, but I'm a little bit hesitant on it.
All right. First game on Sunday, we have the undefeated C9. Well, presumably will be undefeated after CLG, and then the winless Dignitas. But we'll have to see what happens in that Dig Hunter team match. But again, under the assumption that Dardoch comes in to sub for Acadian this week, I think this has the potential to be like a very small potential, albeit to be an upset. I can see a world where you know it's aggressive jungler versus aggressive jungler and Dardoch versus Blabber, and if let's say I don't know, for example, it's like Lisa and Olaf or Olaf and Kindred or any of those kind of combinations. If one gets a lead over the other, it could lead to a pretty easy snowball. So while I think the chances are super super slim for Dignitas, I think there's a way where this could potentially be a decent game. I'm obviously going to go
Really?
C9, but I
Okay.
think there's a chance that this could actually be a good game.
Yeah, to me, this is still an easy C9 pick, so I don't really have too much to say. I hope Dignitas starts to look a little bit better, but I'm not going to see that. I don't see it happening. So for me, it's an easy C9. The next game on our list is FlyQuest versus TL. This should be a pretty good game. I don't know who I want to take in this one. Who do you got?
Yeah,
I think I'm going
honestly,
FlyQuest.
I'm on the fence a little bit here, but I'm gonna go with Team Liquid. I didn't like. I think in terms of FlyQuest, and they're also a bit of a slower team, just like Team Liquid. They're not super aggressive like the C9s or just I guess like the C9s, but I I just find it hard. I just think if both teams are playing the same style, I think Team Liquid just plays that style better in terms of like the late game scaling up and their macro towards the end of the game. So I'm gonna go with Team Liquid on this one. It's kind of unfortunate that I have FlyQuest in my picks going 0-2 this week because I do think they're a really good team, but I do think they have some difficult matchups this week. But both of these games should be really good games for FlyQuest.
See, for me, it's really interesting that you say TL has the better late game because, as I was just mentioning, Impact has not been on the same page as his team. I don't want to say it's an Impact problem because it could definitely be a TL problem, but they're getting these leads in laning phase and finding ways to lose them. So I actually think FlyQuest has looked better in the late game. And even though I think both these teams looked a little lackluster this past weekend, I think it's going to be probably our matchup of the week, either this one or the FlyQuest and EG. I'm going to go with FlyQuest on this one. I think they're the better team, and I think they're going to show that on Sunday. Next up on our list is TSM and CLG, a old rivalry, if you want
Yeah,
to
El
call it
Clasico.
a rivalry anymore. I personally don't call it a rivalry anymore, but maybe with CLG actually starting to win some games, it can actually become one. What are your thoughts on this one?
I mean, like you said, this is it's a bit of an OG rivalry, the El Clasico as they used to call it. But it's funny to think that both of these teams are 4-2 because I think this match is just super TSM favored, and
Yep.
I think it's fairly obvious for TSM. But it's really surprising that both of these teams are set at 4-2, mainly CLG that they're 4-2.
Yeah, it would so be TSM to lose this game though. So, and I know I say that about a lot of games, but it just would. I'm gonna go with TSM as well. It's to me, it's a very obvious pick. Anything else on this one before we move to our last game on Sunday?
Nope. Last game of Sunday, EG versus Immortals. Not too much to say about this matchup. I think I'm going to go with EG just for the fact that I think they look a lot better than Immortals, and I don't think Xmithy will be able to carry the weight of Immortals over the EG roster.
I'm gonna go with EG as well. Although I don't feel that confident in it, just simply because we haven't seen this Immortal squad too much, right? We've seen them for 1 week, and also like Smithy mentioned in his interview with Travis Gafford, they've been playing academy teams. Like they've been scrimming against academy teams for about a month now. So it will take time, I think, for this Immortal squad to really come into their own. But I'm not convinced that they're a bottom team anymore. We'll have to wait and see. But I am convinced that EG is a top half team, and so for that reason, I'm going with EG.
Interesting picks for this week. I think this is the most discrepancy that we've had in any of our picks for
Yeah.
any given week.
Do you want to pull up our bets before we shut her down?
Yeah, your face is gonna get covered here.
They don't need to see my face.
Yeah, you need a haircut anyway.
I know.
Okay.
Hair is fucking
Uh,
long, man.
and now they should be up there right now. Your face getting covered, obviously, but just first glance at these bets right here. What do you think are some interesting ones that you could consider taking?
I gotta take Golden Guardians over 100 Thieves. Whoever is making these odds is trolling, man. These are great odds for a team that has been struggling and is now putting in academy players. Golden Guardians, yeah, maybe they've looked a little shaky, but I can tell you for sure 100 Thieves has looked more shaky. To me, that is the best bet on this sheet. But there's a couple other ones I have my eye on. I did take FlyQuest over EG, and I do not think that that matchup is as lopsided as these odds would suggest. So I also took FlyQuest in that one. And then there was one more that I need to find on here. Oh, it's the FlyQuest versus Team Liquid. I have FlyQuest slightly favored in that one, and the odds are 2-1. So nothing amazing. I think those are fair odds for FlyQuest side. So I would take FlyQuest in both games, and then I would definitely take Golden Guardians in the first match on Friday Night League against 100 Thieves.
Yeah, I think just even mentioning back to our picks, I think both of us kind of feel that both the FlyQuest games are even games for the most part. I think I picked EG and TL just because I think those teams will be a little bit better on the day. But I think those games are definitely not as lopsided as these bets say that they are. And definitely the Golden Guardians versus 100 Thieves. I don't know who the hell is making these bets, but
Yeah,
100 Thieves is most definitely not favored in that matchup.
gotta get in now before these odds change. I do not think these odds will be like this the rest of the week. So if anyone's considering taking some bets, it's good to get on there now and look at these amazing odds before they go.
Yeah, I'm gonna. They will be able to see your face again now. You're back.
Okay. All right. I am back live again. You can see my long ass hair. Just for anybody that's still hanging around in the chat, please do drop us a follow if you enjoyed the episode. If anybody is on YouTube, leave us a like and definitely leave any comments, any suggestions that you have for the podcast. We want to hear from you guys. Our Twitters are also on the page. Feel free to tweet at us any thoughts that you guys have. Anything else before we shut her down, JNT?
We have actually started using our Clan Fiesta Twitter, so we will actually be posting on that thing now. We're gonna post our picks for each games on the day of the games. So like when Friday comes out, we'll do our hashtag C9 win and our hashtag what was the other game? Was it Golden Guardians? I think that we picked. Yeah, it was Golden Guardians Hunter T. We both picked
I don't
Golden
know.
Guardians. But yeah, we're gonna
Okay.
we're gonna start actively using that a lot more. So feel free to follow that and definitely send us any questions if you have any. I think this upcoming week of LCS is going to be a good week. I think we have two good games in both of the FlyQuest games, and we got some new rosters coming to the LCS, so I think it should be a good week.
One last thing I want to say before we go is next week we are going to have a different time for our episode. Actually, the next 3 weeks, our episodes' times will change for the live version. They will all be uploaded to YouTube, so you can expect them on the Clown Fiesta podcast channel on YouTube Monday nights. However, the live episode will be at a different time. Keep track of our Twitter. We will leave updates on Twitter as to when the episodes will be. Anything else, JNT?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Appreciate you guys listening, and we hope to see you guys next week on Monday.
Thanks, guys.